Hi, my name is Miles Goldsmith, and this is my podcast, Game Design Hour, where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Alex Mochi. He is the creator and lead designer of Recipe for Disaster. Before we get into today's interview, I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can check them out on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can find their website using the link in the description. Stick around until the end of the episode to find out how you can get 20% off your next order. Let's get into the interview. Hi.
Hey.
So when did you first realize you wanted to work in the video game industry?
When I was 11, I picked up a book at the local library. And up until then, I thought that video games were like, NES era. And Master System. I had a Sega Master System. And I thought people had to physically wire inside the chips the commands. I didn't understand that they could be programmed. Keep in mind, this is like in the 80s. So I saw a book for BASIC. And I was like, dude, I can use my dad's computer to program Snake. So yeah, that's when it started. I then studied tech in high school, IT in college, and project management in another college, then Paros, Blizzard, Amazon, and others. So 5 years ago, went off corporate and indie. That's the short version.
How did the idea for a Recipe for Disaster first originate?
RFD, simple, kitchen nightmares. Very simple. It's supposed to be a prototype. Well, it was supposed to be a very quick 6 months project. Is now 3 years long. It was supposed to be a quick project to make Rest of Industry 2 to see how deep we could bring the whole NPCs and employees and that kind of stuff. But it grew a little bit.
How large was the team that worked on Recipe for Disaster?
12.
Mm-hmm. How much research was needed to be done into recipes and that sort of stuff while working on Recipe for Disaster?
A lot. I have a formal chef training. I worked in the kitchen, went to Italy to study cooking. So I've been cooking for quite some time. So I just put a lot of personal experience and then a lot of research. Every single price of all the portions in the game are based off Tesco, a British supermarket. So all the prices are realistic as well.
What was it like working on a video game during a pandemic?
Nothing changed because it's all virtual. I've never seen in person anybody of my team, and I've been working with them for years. So nothing changed.
How does the original idea for a Recipe for Disaster differ from what ended up getting shipped?
A lot. It was supposed to be a light management game, like quirky, kind of like The Sims, very lightweight. But then the more we added, the more we wanted. So it ended up growing on its own. Video games are very organic in that kind of way.
Were there any big bugs or glitches that you ran into while working on it?
Yeah, of course, it's software. So constantly, innumerable amount, like employees sitting down with customers to eat with them, or crossing walls, or people thinking about toilets for 6 hours. A lot of weird stuff. Like I try to keep the patch notes in English so that people can read it, and I need to explain very quickly what we fixed. So if you want some examples, just read the patch notes.
What was one interesting idea that ended up getting cut from the game?
I think multiple suppliers. The fact that the suppliers should be very unreliable, so you need to go into more expensive ones that are slower but more reliable, and the fact that you could order chicken and the guy woke up one day and, hey, I'm out of chicken. So yeah, I think that was a pretty big idea, that it's very reflective of real life, but it doesn't gamify itself very well.
Did playtesting change much during COVID?
During COVID? No, because again, everything virtual. So we had internal builds, just email the access codes and the address to download the build. So no, nothing.
Mm-hmm. Which parts of Recipe for Disaster required the most time and effort so that you could make it exactly the way you wanted it to be?
The cooking order. The cooking order and the pathfinding. No, scrap that. The recipe editor. The recipe editor had many iterations, and the first ones felt like a flow chart that you would need to go to a business school to understand. It was very complicated, extremely realistic once you understand it, but maybe I need to sit down with you for half an hour to explain it. So yeah, recipe editor.
Were there any things that you fought to keep in the game or get put in the game that ended up getting cut?
Maybe a tech tree or a skill tree. Other games do it. I'm not convinced it could translate too well in this one, even though we put it in our previous games.
What would the skill tree have looked like?
It was more of a tech tree. So basically, you would need to research the unlock for different suppliers that have more ingredients, unlock better appliances, and you start with only rented ones or access to marketing, that kind of stuff. But if you increase the amount of complexity and gameplay elements organically, I think it's simpler. Time will tell, because it's not completely scrapped. It's still just not convinced.
So how did the scope for Recipe for Disaster change from the first idea to what you have now?
A lot. Again, it was supposed to be a 6-month project, very quick to relax after making Rise of Industry and then making Rise of Industry 2. Now it's 3 years and we're just in alpha. So it's just a kind of, it's not exactly feature creep. It's just that why do something half-assed when you can do it like excellently? So yeah.
What was the biggest design challenge that you faced while working on Recipe for Disaster, and how did you fix it?
We released without free play and sandbox mode, just a few campaign levels, because, early access, I can do kind of whatever I want, but because all I care is about the core loop and feedback, was a huge mistake. We should have released first free play and then do the scenarios. Score dropped a lot because of it, and then it increased like foam, basically, once we added it. That was a big mistake.
What would you say is the core gameplay loop, and did that change throughout working on the game?
Honestly, the core, I think, should never change, because that's the first thing that you prototype and you need to make sure that it works. So it's still understanding what people want. Again, it's like Rise of Industry. Don't just give what you want. Understand what the market needs and requires and find a way to give it to them. I think that's the base of marketing a business. So it's basically that. Listen to the customers, adapt the menu, give it, they change, you adapt. Very reactive gameplay.
What was the process for getting Recipe for Disaster onto the platforms that it's currently on?
It can be summed up very quickly, like get a publisher and let them do it. But yeah, it's basically just leave it to the publisher and focus on making the game.
Do you have plans to add more updates in the future?
Absolutely. It's still in early access. There's a whole roadmap waiting to be accessed and a lot of post-release content planned. So yeah, still, I don't know, year and a half to go.
So looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the initial launch?
Free play from day one, more modding, quicker development, more modular design, more better architecture, quicker development as a whole. Mm-hmm.
What was the biggest lesson that you have learned from working on Recipe for Disaster?
Do more pre-production. Before the first line of code, do more design. A lot more. Everything written down, not written in stone, but have more homework done. Right? More planning. Not just wing it.
So what sort of planning would you have wanted to do beforehand?
Not all, because it would be very difficult to do the whole GDD, the game design document, but at least, 75% of it, 80% of it. We had 30%. Mm-hmm. We just had the core loop and a couple of mechanics planned out, not defined. And we were just doing it in a very, what they call now incorrectly, agile way. Like, we'll see when we get there kind of approach. In games, it works because you can throw it on early access. It can work, but it delays everything a lot. There's many iterations. There's a lot of time wasted. It would have been better to just, instead of spending, like, I don't know, 2-3 weeks in pre-development, maybe spend 2-3 months. And that could have saved maybe a year of development.
Sorry to pop in here, but I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can find their website using the link in the description. Stick around until the end of the episode to find out how you can get 20% off your next order. Let's get back into the interview. What advice would you give to someone who's just kind of starting out, not really sure how to make a game? What would be your advice for how to get started?
As a designer or developer?
Both.
Both. Designer, simple. Fail often and early is a very important mantra. Do a lot of games, release them very often, and just ask for opinions, develop a thick skin, and just learn to understand what is positive feedback and who's just a troll and just hating. For developers, think in a modular and maintenance light system. So always build looking ahead. The solid principle is called incredibly important. Always look ahead.
And what would be your advice to newer devs who are in the middle of a project trying to get that finished and maybe stuck somewhere?
Well, there's a saying that the last 1% takes 99% of the time. So for developers, giving the last push, first, I'm a perfectionist. So a game is never finished. It's just released. Just need to find when to say this is good enough and release it. You can always improve it better. But quoting Miyamoto, a delay is temporary, a bad release is forever. Incredibly, incredibly important. Don't be afraid to push stuff to the future, but stay focused.
Which part of Recipe for Disaster was the most difficult to design?
Maybe the employee to customer interaction, what we call the stress system, that it will soon be ported over to the customers. That is very difficult because no game does it. They all focus on perfect machines that you hire and they do their job. And there's no other game that has so many interactions. Maybe RimWorld on a certain extent. But that was incredibly difficult to do. And it's still not done, even after years.
What part of the game did you enjoy designing the most?
Disasters, chaos, all the dynamic events, all the stuff that can go wrong. Yeah, absolutely.
Which system in the game is the most complex?
System, very possibly cooking, because it has many steps, many things can interrupt it, many things the player can do to just interrupt it and break it. And it's not exactly prone to error because it's what we spend the most amount of time with, but it's very complex and has many corner cases. So very possibly the whole cooking process. Put the menu, the dish on the menu and have the AI pick it up from there. All that. Mm-hmm.
So which different job titles sort of did I think you said 12 members of your team have, like for newer game devs, knowing what they really need to get a game made?
Okay, so to put it bluntly, because there's, of course, redundancies. So 3 programmers is quick to say. So there's already 3 out of 12. The main ones would be normal programmer, lead programmer or developer or architect or however you want to call it. Usually it's lead dev. There is the guy that mentors the others and says how the architecture should go, does all the code reviews and so on, and keeps the code healthy. or should. Artist, 2D, 3D, and UI. UI guy is usually also UX. That is incredibly difficult because it's very subjective. It's a very difficult job that everybody says they do, but very difficult to do. Then in larger teams, let's say larger than 8 or 10, there's usually a producer / Scrum Master / Task Master. There's the one to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, deadlines, keeps up with all the tasks, and so on. Code designer and lead designer. You wouldn't have a game if you don't know what's going to be about. And audio guy. Can be music and audio for 2 different people or just one doing all of it. Yeah. I think that's all the main roles in indie, of course.
Mm-hmm.
AAA is a completely different beast.
What sort of marketing did you do before the release?
It was mostly done by our publisher. So basically contacting a bunch, like written press is pretty much dead. And conventions are impossible with COVID. So we, of course, had plans for E3, GDC, and Gamescom. None happened for obvious reasons. So all the marketing fell upon the content creators, influencers, and so on. So just get a few sponsored content out there and get others interested.
What engine was Recipe for Disaster designed in?
Unity. Heavily modified because we stuck to an older version, non-updated because we did a huge amount of framework changes. And if we update it, it just destroys months of work. So we're stuck with an old one. Mm-hmm.
Would you recommend Unity to new devs?
Depends for what. There's mainly 4 engines. So RPG Maker is excellent and usually downplayed because of the graphics, as Super Nintendo graphics. Game Maker is also very good, but it's best for prototypes and small games, like, for example, in game jams. Unity, if graphics are not that important and you want to rely on mechanics-heavy games. And Unreal Engine, if graphics are all you care about and behind-the-scenes stuff doesn't matter. There's no right answer. I personally use Unity because for me the backend is incredibly important. And Unreal can't keep up with management games. So it's more of a process of elimination as to which one we chose.
Do you think that making a game with everyone in separate places virtually as you did works just as well as everyone in person in the same office?
No, the human touch is important, getting everybody in the room, passing the ball so everybody can brainstorm together. Has a lot of handicaps. Also, it gives the feel of being less serious, even though we've been working like with contract, taxes, business, boring bureaucracy stuff. But being in person is far more productive and serious. It's more prone to issues. Because if somebody pisses you off, you can just mute him for a while. Like, hey, I'm going for a coffee. You can't do that in person, unfortunately. I wish I could. But it's more difficult. Maybe much more difficult even. Mm-hmm.
What platform did you use to work virtually?
Jira for the tasks, GitLab for the code storage. We used to use Slack for communication, but it got stupid expensive. And Discord took the reins because it's almost free and almost because I want some server stuff. And does almost what Slack did. So yeah, Jira, Slack, GitLab, Confluence for the documentation, and that's it.
So what's next for you? What are you working on now?
Still finishing Recipe and then Rest of Industry 2. After that, there is going to be a mix between Recipe and Rest of Industry 1.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that subscribe button, follow button. It's different on every platform. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter at Game Design Hour. And hey, if you're liking the show, consider sharing it with a friend or giving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Today's episode was sponsored by Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can check out their Instagram by going to Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can check out their website by using the link in the description. If you want to get 20% off your next order, make sure to use code GDH20 at checkout. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.